Good morning, everyone. Thank you so much for joining us for Positioning Your Business for Success in 2025. My name is Carla, and I'm one of the three members of PrepShift, and I'll tell you a little bit more about us. PrepShift is a tech-enabled restaurant consultancy and technical assistance provider here in Boston, and we work with independent restaurants and their teams to help them get on the same page to create more sustainable and profitable businesses for everyone. I'm joined today by my two co-founders, Irene Lee and Dylan Gully, and you'll be hearing more from them in future presentations. So our goals for today are to discuss some of the success patterns that we've found in thriving food businesses and to also discuss some of the challenges that businesses are facing more generally. And then we're going to do a guided assessment so you can identify your business's own strengths and weaknesses, and then we'll talk about some steps for improvement. Like I mentioned, we'll cover the current state of the industry. We'll talk a little bit about the PrepShift diagnostic, which is how we gather some of this data. We'll talk about some common success patterns that we found in the most successful businesses. We'll conduct a mini assessment together. We'll talk about a P&L self-assessment that you can do later on your own, and we'll do some action planning and wrap up. So to start, the current state of the restaurant industry. Everyone keeps telling us things are back to normal with the restaurant industry. So revenues are back to pre-pandemic levels, and the industry is generally humming along, but we have seen some lasting changes to consumer preferences, technology, and economic pressures that many of you may be feeling. One of the main things that are currently challenging the industry is rising operational costs. I'm sure everyone is definitely feeling this one. So between 2019 and 2024, food costs have increased almost 29% nationally, and labor has increased 31%. And the pre-tax profit of the average food business continues to be between 3 and 5% NOP, which is actually pretty similar to what we were seeing before the pandemic. And this is from the NRA. And there have been some lasting changes to consumer behavior. Once upon a time, third-party takeout DoorDash delivery was a little bit more controversial, but now it's clear that third-party services and working with them is here to stay. Dine-in customers are also wary of things that are going on with the economy and are being more mindful of their spending. And so we're seeing an overall reduction in check averages. And the James Beard Foundation's 2025 Independent Restaurant Report found that consumers are also shifting from alcoholic to non-alcoholic beverages, which is further reducing check averages. And for as much as we hear that revenue is back to pre-pandemic levels, there's been uneven recovery nationally. Some downtown areas are experiencing less foot traffic since the pandemic. Businesses have moved. There is new hybrid work arrangements, which is also contributing to less foot traffic in downtown areas. For example, in Boston's financial district, there's only been a return of 47, almost 48% of pre-pandemic foot traffic. And this is from mobile phone data analyzed by the University of Toronto. So even though the whole industry seems to have bounced back, it doesn't feel that way for everyone. And most businesses can't just pick up and move. So this is something that definitely impacts the bottom line. We've also seen changes in technology and how it's being used. Love it or hate it, QR codes are also here to stay. And we're seeing an increased adoption of online ordering, updated POS systems, and digital marketing. And technology availability at our food businesses is something that consumers are paying attention to, and it is affecting their choices. And something that is largely felt in larger cities are labor shortages. Wages on the whole are increasing across the industry, which is wonderful for employees, but continues to be challenging for employers. The restaurant industry also has one of the highest turnover rates of any industry, about 80% over the last 10 years. And a Seven Shifts report that we recently consulted shows that 65% of operators describe the labor market as tight or very tight. So the people are really feeling the pain. And so if you as a business owner are experiencing labor challenges, you're certainly not on your own. Another thing that we really saw during the pandemic, but continues to be an issue, is supply chain volatility. There continue to be disruptions that affect ingredient availability and pricing. And the USDA shows that food away from home prices, so not what you purchase at the grocery store, but anytime you get takeout or through the wholesale supply chain, those prices have increased 4.3% even in the first 7 months of 2024, and that's the latest data that they have on that. We're also seeing an increased demand for sustainability from our customers. Customers are paying a lot more attention to environmentally responsible practices within restaurants, and the NRA reports that 72% of our diners say they care about how a restaurant handles food waste and the availability of sustainable packaging. Another thing that's a little bit more difficult to quantify, but is certainly an effect of the economy and the pressures that people are feeling, is that customers have a higher expectation at every price point to justify the expenses that they're making. And so they're wanting more perceived value for the dollars that they're spending. And so it's requiring food businesses to be creative and reach beyond their comfort zone to create multiple access points. So if before you were just doing dine-in, takeout now becomes another revenue stream or delivery, or perhaps even adding retail items to try to capture more consumer dollars. And something that continuously is a challenge for restaurants is that very many of them tend to have very small cash reserves, making it a lot more difficult to rise to unexpected challenges or emergencies. JP Morgan Chase found that the median small restaurant only has 16 days of cash buffer in reserve. And another challenge is certainly owner compensation. A food business should be able to make a market rate, allow an owner to make a market rate wage in order to be considered sustainable. But our own diagnostic found that across the spectrum, even in the most advanced businesses to those that are struggling, 71% of our restaurant operators report themselves as either uncompensated or undercompensated by their business. And so I'd love to take a moment to hear from folks that are in the webinar today. What would you say is your number one business concern in the moment? Is it any of the ones that we just discussed, or is there something else that's top of mind for you? I'm not sure if you can come off mute, but if not, would love to hear from some folks in the chat. All right, from Katie, cash flow. Yes, thank you. That is definitely one that is a concern for a lot of folks. Irene mentioned managing pandemic debt. That is certainly something we see with a lot of our clients. Thank you, Irene. Anyone else? We'll take one more comment or in the chat, or you are welcome to come off mute.
Carla, I also know that a lot of our clients are worried about tariffs right now, and there's a lot of chaos in that part of the economy. We have one friend who does Sri Lankan cuisine, and I think tariffs on Sri Lanka were suggested at 44%.
That's pretty scary. And yes, that's certainly a concern that we're all keeping an eye on. And we'll see that kind of captured in that supply chain volatility, right? Some things will become less available or the prices will change, and we'll have to adapt. So, with so many pressures that small businesses face, how can you know what to prioritize? And at PrepShift, we firmly believe that it's really important to understand where you are today so you can make a really strategic plan about where you want to go next and how you're going to achieve your goals. And so now I'd like to talk a little bit about the PrepShift diagnostic. So the PrepShift diagnostic is a 150-point health check that evaluates a business across four key areas: finance, operations, people management, and strategy. And then the resulting score gives us a sense of a business's development stage. And within the four areas that I mentioned, some of the things that the assessment covers, which is conducted as an interview with folks that we work with, is things like your cash flow, like Katie mentioned, your profitability, your debt picture, and what your current expense and financial planning looks like. Under operations, we ask some questions about your workflow systems, how you manage inventory, food safety, and the customer experience. On the people management side, we look at staff recruitment, training, and retention, and leadership development and performance management. And under strategy, we look at your business planning, goal setting, market position, and how you continuously improve your business. And so this assessment produces a score that puts businesses in one of five stages of development. And they are independent of the business's age. It's more about how prepared are you to face and weather the challenges that are coming up ahead, as well as your own profitability. And so the five categories are unsustainable, surviving, stabilizing, growing, and optimizing. And I'll go into them shortly. And so, like I mentioned, the goal of the diagnostic, which is a PrepShift tool, is to help businesses understand where they're starting from so they can identify their own strengths, pinpoint their weaknesses, and know what to prioritize. And so later in this presentation, there'll be an opportunity for you to take a mini version of the assessment to give you some things to think about and start planning for. So the first stage, which we would consider the lowest stage of development, is unsustainable. These businesses are facing some really serious challenges. Usually, owner compensation is sacrificed completely to keep the business afloat. There's high debt relative to income, minimal savings, and the business is unprofitable over a sustained period of time. And in this case, we might suggest major restructuring or temporary closure to allow the business to regroup or to even consider an exit strategy. We use this designation very, very sparingly, and we reserve it only for when there are no other responsible options for a business owner and there's no viable recovery or improvement plan. The next stage is surviving. We call these folks keeping the lights on. You can typically cover your day-to-day expenses and manage your day-to-day operations, but there's really no cash left over to invest in the business or into any long-term improvements. And so a lot of these customers also have really positive online reviews. They tend to perform really well in Google ratings, but really their financial fundamentals are what need attention. And about only a third of restaurants at this stage are profitable at all, although that's often subsidized by the owner foregoing pay or taking a very small salary that is not a market wage. And so these businesses have not implemented basic financial practices like budgeting or menu costing, but it is our hope that with some focus on the financials, doing some budgeting and improving menu costing, they can work towards greater sustainability. The next stage, where a lot of businesses fall in, is stabilizing. These businesses tend to hover around break-even profitability, and the owners spend some time working on the business, meaning investing in strategy and thinking about the bigger picture as opposed to just the day-to-day operations that still demand most of their attention. These businesses will be ready for growth if they can invest in more robust financial practices and improve their cost controls so that they can continue to advance. And many of the business in the stabilizing stage that we see struggle with high occupancy costs or overhead costs, which indicate some expense management issues, but also that they just might not be generating enough revenue to get them to the next stage. And the fourth stage is growing. These businesses are really showing promising signs of stability and success. The businesses that we see in this category are generally generating about 1.1 million in annual revenue, and about 80% of them are profitable. So a big jump from some of the earlier stages. And so even though they might not have all their financial systems in place or their ducks in a row, they are certainly making progress and are prioritizing their financial systems. The owners are also starting to use data from their POS system, from talking to their customers to manage their business more effectively. And with continued investment in these systems, these businesses are really set up to grow and potentially expand to more locations or just grow their top line revenue. And the last stage is optimizing. These are the businesses that are really thriving in the face of all of the challenges that we just discussed that affect everybody in the industry. Owners are spending time working on their business, strategizing. This is a big priority for them, and then measuring against those goals. And they're making data-driven decisions. They've really moved beyond stability and are investing in improving their employee experience, optimizing operations, and increasing profitability. They also do a great job of managing their debt. They have about a 17% debt to income ratio, which is the lowest of any of the categories that we've discussed. And so a little bit about who participated in these surveys. So over the last year, we've analyzed over 100 independent food businesses, a lot in Massachusetts, but also beyond. 78% of them are minority owned and 50% are women owned, which speaks to Prepship's specific demographic. We particularly work with minority and women owned businesses. Uh, the number of minority-owned businesses as a larger percentage, like in all of Massachusetts, is about 20%. So we really dialed into our minority-owned businesses. And the age of the businesses ranged from less than a year, so freshly opened, to 39 years old. This last one, they almost made it to their 40th anniversary. We wish we had caught them there so we could say 40. And in terms of restaurant size, pretty consistently, while we saw businesses that had no seats, they were takeout only places, which is great. About the average was 43 seats, physical seats in the restaurant. And their revenue ranged from $60,000 annually to 5.4 million. And the average team size was 9 full-time equivalent employees. And the way we calculate this is two part-time employees count for one full-time employee. So these restaurants generally had, on average, more than 9 humans that worked in the business, but their hours added up to an equivalent of 9 full-time employees. And so next, I want to focus on what can we learn from people in those later stage categories, our 4s and 5s, growing and optimizing. That was the top 40% of our participants. Like I mentioned, before you know where you're going, you need to know where you are. And so we've captured some success patterns that we observed in these businesses that tend to be outperforming the majority of the group. So businesses that are in growing stages, so growing and optimizing, tend to average 1.3 million in revenue, while surviving businesses are only averaging 500,000 in revenue. And the physical business size tends to be about the same across the board. So what are the things that are making a difference? Financial literacy is a big one. 100% of the folks we interviewed in advanced stage businesses understand their business's finances and are confident in their understanding of their business's finances versus 64% of participants in earlier stages. Again, knowledge really gives you the power to address any challenges you might be facing and improve. Our top performers were also investing in professional financial administration. 75% were using professional bookkeepers versus only 39% of businesses in earlier stages who are more relying on doing their own bookkeeping or a family member. And 83% maintained regular communication with their bookkeeper. What does that mean? For us, we like to see folks communicating with their bookkeepers at least on a monthly basis to review P&L reports and to address any issues with categorizing or other things that might come up in the normal course of business. And 85% of those folks with bookkeepers are conducting monthly P&L reviews versus 36% in earlier stages.
Carla, I'm curious, just for the folks in this call, who does speak with their bookkeeper monthly, or how often do you speak with your bookkeeper? For some folks we work with, like it's not a question that's necessarily come up yet. And so, given that we're probably all at very different stages of development, if you would just throw in the chat how often you do communicate with them, that would be really helpful context for us.
Thank you, Dylan. Please, would love for you to participate in the chat, and I'll keep going in the meantime, and then we can revisit if we get any comments. So another thing that we see our top performers doing is really disciplined cost management. 82% are keeping their occupancy costs, which would be rent, utilities, waste management, and property taxes, below 12% of their annual revenue. They're also doing a great job, 85%, of keeping their prime costs below 63% of revenue. And those would be our two most controllable expenses, which are labor and our ingredients that go into the food that we produce. And very importantly, 73% have fully costed their menus. That means they know down to the cent how much it costs to produce each dish that is on their menu so they can tell if it's profitable or not. And I see we have a few comments. Yep, Katie, love to see that you're meeting with your bookkeeper regularly, even though that bookkeeper is us. We're happy to have you. And another thing that our advanced stage businesses are doing is labor management. This is really important. So 55% are tying their labor budget to revenue projections. What does that mean? They are staffing based on their expected sales at any given time. We know that the restaurant industry can be very seasonal. For example, January, February tends to be a little bit slower, and business tends to peak around September, and then it's a mad rush into the holidays, and then it's quiet again in January. And so instead of having a fixed schedule where everybody works the same hours or same shifts every single week, they are planning based on how much they may expect to make that week based on historic data. And another thing that advanced stage businesses are doing is they're investing in their staff development and cross training. It might not make, again, with small teams, we want to keep folks employed and having gainful jobs. And so cross training allows us to use the same person in multiple areas so we can still give them the hours that they need in order to have a stable job, but it also fulfills the needs of the business. And so we see this more and more, even in much larger companies as well, where folks are learning multiple jobs so that they can jump in when they're needed.
And Carla, I'll just say, it might sound really easy, like, oh yeah, of course we'll tie labor budgets to revenue projections. But I do just want to point out kind of the opposite of this is just saying, here's how many people I need to run the restaurant day to day. And so that's how many people I'm going to put on the schedule. And we hear that a lot, even from clients who run very developed businesses. A lot of times we're just grateful to have staff that we can schedule. And so it can be easy to just let that sort of get away from us. So that's why we see tying the labor to revenue as really helpful. But it does take another layer of thinking, and you have to kind of get past the point where you're like, thank goodness I have enough staff. I'm just going to give them whatever they want on the schedule.
Thank you, Irene. And yes, we definitely understand that this is a really tough balance to strike, the needs of the restaurant and then the needs of the wonderful people that you employ. Next, we have operational efficiency. Advanced stage businesses are able to generate 60% more revenue from the same physical space. They're not bigger, fancier operations necessarily. They have the same number of seats as folks that are performing in the lower stages. And how do they do that? They are being very strategic with their menus. They're working on optimizing front of house service continually, and they're streamlining their kitchen processes, the engineering of their menus, and how that workflow affects every other position. And through these really strong operations, they're building brand loyalty, and it's allowing for dynamic cost controls. Another thing we see our top performers doing is compensating their owners. Only 5% go uncompensated, or another way to think about it is 95% are being compensated versus 32% in earlier stages, which are going uncompensated. We firmly believe that a sustainable business should support market rate compensation for the owner at an absolute minimum. If the owner is not receiving compensation or is being undercompensated, it indicates that the business is just not stable or sustainable yet because you are subsidizing the business. You're hiding the true cost of operating. And so for any of our clients, we always recommend that compensating the owner appropriately should be a high priority goal and something that we work towards. For a lot of businesses, it's not possible to just say, I'm going to pay myself more overnight. But if it's not a goal, it doesn't get done. And for us, we believe in like a holistic wellness of everybody in the business. So it's really important for the owners to avoid financial strain or burnout, which can affect their well-being and their long-term commitment to the business.
Yeah, and I would just say, one of the most fun things we get to do is help people start paying themselves. People, the folks in this call, I'm sure included. You pour yourselves into the business, and sometimes it doesn't pour a ton into you. And so, we want to make sure that you continue to be able to operate your business. And obviously that includes, being compensated and being able to sustain your lives. So, especially for the folks who are uncompensated, it's a pretty big leap to go from not being to being compensated in some way. So there's no shame in doing like baby steps of like, I'm going to start paying myself $50 a week, $50 every 2 weeks, whatever it is. Even if the business can't, you feel like it can't really afford it, try to stress test like that assumption. And every pay period or every two pay periods, bump yourself up $50, bump yourself up $100. And then once you get to the point where you're like, okay, yes, that feeling of I don't think the business can sustain it, it now feels very true. Like I'm having to juggle vendors. Pause it for a while and try to problem solve so you can continue to bump up. But it doesn't need to be, I'm going to go from nothing to $75,000 a year overnight. Just try those incremental changes, and it gives you time to adjust other things to continue to compensate yourself.
Thank you. Yes. Running a business is awesome, but it's not a charity. The whole point is for you to make money. And so we want you to be able to sustain yourselves and your families and those personal goals that you might have. So the next thing we see top performers doing is really prioritizing strategic decision making. 85% are using their business's data to manage the business itself. And so that means they're pulling reports from their POS system, Toast, Square, whatever they might be using, and looking at specifically what they're selling, when, what days of the week are performing, what hours during the day are performing a certain way, and making decisions accordingly. 63% are also creating annual forecasts. So that means they are writing budgets and predictions for how much revenue they expect to generate throughout the year, as well as what expenses they expect throughout the year. And this is really Dylan's area, but the numbers tell the story of your business. And so that's why we really recommend that people look at their P&Ls on a monthly basis. It really is a dispassionate reflection of how things are going. And then we really encourage folks to use those numbers then to plan their work. And then you work your plan. And that's ultimately what we do with clients when we work with them. And so then that allows you to not only set goals, but to track your progress and continue to drive business profitability. And so some of the things we might encourage you to start looking at first are identifying some of the key performance metrics in your business. And this could be a little bit different for everybody, but in general, the type of sales. So for example, if you do lunch and dinner, those would be two different types of sales, your labor costs and your cost of goods sold. And these tracking systems don't need to be fancy at all. You can just do a simple spreadsheet that helps you track some of these items and then see how you're progressing and make changes accordingly. Another thing we see our most successful businesses doing is allowing the owner's role to evolve. We know that amid the day-to-day demands of running a food business, it can be really difficult to find time to plan and strategize. However, prioritizing even an hour per week where there are no interruptions and you just have time to work on the business can really improve operations and make the business more resilient to market changes and some of the volatility that we're seeing, so you can set yourself up for long-term success and stability. 93% of those top businesses that we surveyed are making time to work on the business. Another really important factor, especially in today's world, is maintaining your digital presence. 100% of the folks that we interviewed in those top that received those top scores are maintaining 4+ star rating on Google. All of them did. And 90% of them are making sure that their websites are fully up to date. This is really important because it's often the first way that folks interact with you. If they're not walking by your physical restaurant, they're probably going to look you up online or see what's in the neighborhood when they're visiting, and that's how you might come up. So making sure that your menus are accurate, your hours of operation, maybe parking information or other key things are really important to make sure that customers can find you and come spend their dollars. And first impressions really do happen online. According to Finances Online, more than 90% of the purchasing public reads online reviews. And so it's really important that you stay up to date with what your online presence looks like. We always recommend that people Google their business from time to time so you can see what results are popping up first and making sure that they're accurate. And lastly, the 10th success pattern that we see in advanced stage businesses is revenue diversification. 78% of these businesses have multiple revenue streams. So that means they're not just doing dine-in service or takeout, they're combining that with something else. It might be catering, cooking classes, offering third-party delivery, something like that. And when you spread the risk by having multiple revenue streams, you have an opportunity to capture more consumer dollars. Do you have any questions about those 10 success patterns or any comments from you, Dylan or Irene?
Yeah, while people put any thoughts or questions in the chat, this item in particular, revenue diversification, I think a lot of folks felt this winter hard. Normally in a place like Massachusetts, but in general, winter months are slower, regardless of concept. And this year, most people experienced a steeper drop off in the winter. So as you come out of this and into your, season where you make hay, taking advantage of that is huge, but also trying to think ahead of what is it going to be like next year. Assuming that the dip might continue to be a little bit steeper than it has been in the past. We worked with a business that had a really clever way of trying to handle this. She does a lot of events in the nice weather, weddings, things like that. And she's introducing these like event boxes, which are sort of like mini catering orders for the winter. So capitalizing on holidays, Super Bowl, like she'd outlined a bunch of stuff through the colder months to make these pushes on a basically a monthly basis to substitute in for the nice weather catering. It's kind of a version of that in the winter. So she had to rethink how to like package that offering. But she's already planning for next winter. And before it gets really crazy for a lot of folks in the summer, where it tends to for most businesses, try to give some thought to what it's going to look like when it starts to slow down in the fall and next winter.
Dylan, do you want to talk about classes a little bit?
Sure. Classes, I would say, first off, are not for everybody. But for people who they work for, they are an incredibly profitable way to create revenue. Most of your revenue has a very slim margin, and class revenue tends to be 50% profit, 70% profit, even when you account for labor. And especially if those classes are run by you, you're not paying necessarily other staff members to be involved. So, if you do something unique, or you have even a unique piece of equipment that you use in producing something that people are familiar with, creating an experience where people feel like they get to be kind of behind the curtain with you, you would be surprised how much people are willing to pay for that sort of thrill of cosplaying as a restaurant owner or worker for a day. And so we're talking 90-minute classes, give or take, a little doggy bag when people leave of goodies, and then a couple of highlights in the experience that they, like I said, get to use a unique piece of equipment or get to interface with an expert on a given topic. Depending on where you are, Cambridge being one of those places, people aren't necessarily in it for the food specifically. Like they want to have a cultural experience. They want to have, even like in the case of baking, like a scientific experience. So try to think of how you can package yourself in a unique way. And classes in our experience, they fly off the shelves if you can put together a compelling offering. $100 tickets for 90-minute to 2-hour session. It makes a heck of a lot of difference to your revenue pretty quick.
Yes, I'm also a big fan of classes, but I also let folks know that the prep is a lot of work. This is an offering like any new offering for your business. It needs to make sense for you. It needs to make sense for your overall brand, and it needs to make sense for the time that you're willing to invest to put out a really great product so that you can build that brand loyalty. Thank you, Dylan. And so now here's the fun part where all of you will get to participate is we're going to do a mini diagnostic self-assessment. So for this activity, you're all going to need a sheet of paper. You are welcome to take notes on your phone, and you'll need something to write with if you do decide to go analog, which is my personal preference. And these answers are just for you. So it's like lying to your doctor. The only person it hurts is you. So we encourage you to really be honest with yourself as you consider these questions. And so we'll cover 15 questions that cover some of the key indicators that I just discussed over the 4 areas: finance, operations, people management, and strategy. And each answer choice will have a number next to it, and that corresponds to the number of points you should give yourself. And at the end, we'll add them all up and talk about what it means. And so this mini version of the diagnostic will give you an idea of whether you need to focus on the fundamentals or if you're ready to refine your operations. Even in the diagnostic, nobody ever gets a perfect score because businesses are living and breathing things. There's always something that you can improve. There's always something external that's going on, some new challenge, some new environmental factor. And so none of us are ever going to be perfect, and that's not the goal. It's just continuous progression and improvement. And so I'll give everybody 2 minutes to just gather materials if you need them. You need to go find a notebook or something to write with, and then we'll get started. All right. We're going to get started with our first question. Financial understanding. Do you understand your business finances and review financial statements? Our answer choices are: 1, you don't really look at financial statements and don't necessarily understand your business's finances or feel confident in your understanding of the business. I think that's the more important piece. Option 2, you occasionally look at financial summaries, but maybe don't fully understand them. 3, you review monthly statements, but struggle to interpret all the data. 4, you understand P&L statements, balance sheets, and cash flow reports and review them monthly. Or 5, you analyze financial data monthly or more frequently, you understand all the metrics and use them to make informed decisions about your business. And so write down whichever number corresponds to your answer. Okay, next question. Professional bookkeeping. Do you have professional bookkeeping support? Also, if I'm going too fast, folks, please just come off mute and let me know and I can slow down. So for professional bookkeeping support, One, there is no formal bookkeeping system and your financial records might be a little disorganized. Two, you handle bookkeeping yourself with basic software maybe, but are often behind. Three, you have occasional professional help. Maybe you're reaching out to your accountant's bookkeeper, once a quarter at tax time, but help is really limited and communication is limited. Four, you employ a professional bookkeeper and meet at least monthly. Or five, you have a dedicated bookkeeper who highlights any issues or trends on a monthly basis as they happen, and you review monthly reports together. So make sure you're writing down the number that corresponds with your answer for question number 2. Okay. Question number 3 about occupancy costs. This one might take a little bit of math. So what is your occupancy cost as a percentage of revenue? So the way we calculate this is write down your monthly rent, on average, how much you pay in utilities, gas, water, electric, cable, telephone, all of those services, waste removal, and any property taxes you might be paying on a monthly basis. And then once you've added up that number, you're going to multiply it for 12 by 12 for 12 months in the year, and you're going to divide it by your annual revenue. So your revenue would be all of the sales that you make in a given year. In this case, today's tax day actually. So you probably have a sense of how much your business generated in 2024. That would be a great number to use. So all your total sales in 2024. So I'll give folks a moment to calculate that. And our answer choices are 1, that number is more than 15% of revenue. 2, 13 to 15% of revenue. 3, 11 to 13%. 4, 10 to 11%. And 5, less than 10% of revenue.
And if anyone's having trouble coming up with these numbers, the way to calculate it is on the screen. But if you're having trouble, just send a message in the chat. Happy to help you get to a final number here.
Thank you, Dylan. All right, was everybody able to calculate their occupancy costs, or does anybody need another minute?
And I apologize if you said this, Carla, but some folks, probably most, are not responsible for a portion of property taxes. So if you're not, just don't include it, but it's there in case your landlord does make you responsible for a portion.
All right, we'll move on. Next question, owner compensation. Are you taking appropriate owner compensation? How do we define appropriate? We know that restaurant business owners are doing all the jobs. You're the lead dishwasher, you're fielding customer calls. So I want you to think about all of the hours that you spend in your business. And if you had to hire somebody to replace you to do all of the work that you do, are you receiving the pay that you would need to pay that person to get them to stay and do the job? So with that in mind, answer number 1, no compensation. You're not receiving any compensation from the business, you're not taking a salary, and in fact, you might even be investing some of your personal funding from a second job or savings into the business. 2, minimal draw. You take occasional owner draws, but are receiving well below market rate compensation and are doing so inconsistently. Number 3, you have a basic salary. You receive a regular salary, but it's below market rate. Number 4, market salary. You're receiving market rate compensation. You could feasibly hire somebody to do most of what you do for the amount that you're receiving. And number 5, a complete compensation package. Not only are you receiving a market rate salary, but you are also receiving consistent profit distributions from the business. Next question, menu costing. Is your menu fully costed? And when we say menu costing, we mean that you know down to the cent how much it costs you to produce a dish. So option one, none of the menu has been costed or food costing data is out of date, which we definitely run into with folks. They may have done this exercise, a year or two ago, but they don't have today's current numbers. Two, you have an approximate cost for some items, but there's no systematic approach. Maybe you've costed like your main proteins are the most expensive ingredients in that case. Number three, most menu items have calculated costs, but updates are infrequent, meaning you're not updating the costs every time you do ordering or inventory. Number four, all menu items are costed with quarterly recipe updates, meaning you know the numbers and you're making decisions based on how some ingredient prices might be fluctuating. Number five, every item is precisely costed with recipe cost cards, meaning it's documented somehow. You're regularly updating this data and you're using strategic pricing analysis. All right, our next question. Prime costs. What are your prime costs as, and this question is incomplete here, your prime costs as a percentage of revenue. So same as what we did with occupancy. If you think about how much you spent in food and packaging last year, 2024, plus how much you spent on labor, and this would be all the direct labor, including your own, anybody that was hands-on in food preparation or serving customers in the business. Take that number and divide it by your annual revenue, and that will give you your prime cost percentage. And so that might take a couple moments to calculate, but you'll give yourself a 1 if it's above 70% of revenue, 2 if it's 67 to up to 70% of revenue, 3, 64 to 66% of revenue, 4 points if it's 60 to 63% of revenue, or a 5 if it's below 60% of revenue. All right, next question. SOPs. How developed and well implemented are your restaurant's standard operating procedures? And so that is all of the how-tos of running the business, and your SOPs govern every system within your business. So option one, operations rely entirely on verbal instructions. There are no written procedures. 2, some critical procedures are documented but are inconsistently used, and training in your establishment is primarily verbal with limited reference to written materials. 3, written procedures exist for key operations and staff are trained on these procedures, but adherence and accountability being really important here, are pretty inconsistent. 4, there are detailed written procedures that cover all operational areas, and you have routine training to ensure that the staff follow SOPs and all managers enforce compliance. 5, complete detailed SOPs are integrated into daily operations. Your entire staff is trained and regularly tested on procedures, and SOPs are continually improved through staff feedback and data. Next question, labor planning. Do you tie labor budgets to revenue projections? 1, there's a set schedule every week and no real relationship between staffing and projected sales. 2, there's a set schedule and we only make adjustments if necessary. 3, we have general targets for labor percentage, but limited forecasting, which means future planning. 4, we schedule labor based on weekly sales projections. Or 5, we schedule labor based on weekly sales projections and adapt shifts to align with busy and quiet times, so we're never over or understaffed, or rarely over or understaffed, I should say. Okay. Question 9, staff retention. How would you describe your staff retention? 1, there's nearly complete staff turnover annually, which means on an annual basis, all of your employees leave or almost all your employees leave, and then you have to hire new folks. 2, there's around 75% staff turnover annually, so 3/4 of your staff leaves, and then you have to hire new folks. 3, half of your staff turns over annually. 4, most of my staff has been there for at least a year. Or 5, most staff members have been there for at least 2 years. Now, question number 10, and remember we have 15 questions, so we're almost done. Working in versus on the business. Do you make time to work on your business? 1, you work exclusively in day-to-day operations with really no time for strategic planning. 2, you find a few hours per month for bigger picture thinking. 3, you dedicate at least a few days per month to strategic work. 4, you spend more time on strategy than operations. Or 5, your business runs efficiently without you and you primarily focus on growth and strategic initiatives. Next question, data-driven decisions. Do you use data to make business decisions? 1, decisions are based on gut feeling and intuition without supporting data. 2, you track a few key numbers but don't really analyze them very deeply. 3, review sales and cost data monthly to inform decisions. 4, you track multiple KPIs or key performance metrics on a weekly basis across all business areas. Or 5, you use advanced analytics to drive major decisions with predictive modeling and trend analysis. Question number 12, forecasting and budgeting. Do you create annual forecasts and monitor budgets? There is no formal budgeting, financial planning, or forecasting. That's option 1. 2, you create simple annual sales projections without detailed budgets. 3, you create an annual forecast but rarely reference it during the year. 4, you create an annual forecast, have quarterly financial reviews and detailed budgets. 5, you have a comprehensive annual plan with monthly reviews, budgets, and active adjustments. Question number 13, digital presence. How would you describe your online presence? You have an outdated or missing website and little to no social media usage. 2, you have a basic functional website, but limited social media and limited engagement. You're probably posting just when you can. Number 3, you have an updated website and post regularly on 1 to 2 social media platforms, maybe Instagram or TikTok. 4, you have a cohesive presence across multiple platforms with regular engagement and a fully up-to-date website. Or 5, we have a comprehensive strategy across all relevant platforms with strong engagement and reputation management, as well as measurable results for your social media initiatives. Question 14. How many revenue streams does your business have? 1, we mostly rely entirely on one revenue source. So for example, dine-in sales or just takeout. 2, we have 2 revenue streams, but one is very dominant. So one represents more than 80% of your revenue. 3, we have 2 revenue streams with a reasonable balance between them. 4, we have 3 or more revenue streams with no single source exceeding 60% of revenue. 5, we have multiple well-developed revenue streams that balance seasonality and protect against market shifts. And our last question, how would you describe your profitability in the last year? So let's think about 2024, especially since we all just did our taxes. The business has been operating at a significant loss for more than 6 months. So we would say a loss of 10% NOP or more. The business has been operating at a modest loss, -5% to 0%, so break even for a few months. 3, the business hovers around break even consistently. 4, the business has stable profitability in the 0 to 5% range. Or five, the business has sustained profitability above 6% with a positive growth trend. And so now, please take a few moments to tally up your score. So you're going to add up all of the points. And we'll just give you all a moment to add that up. All right. So if you scored between 0 and 30 points, we would say your business is facing some significant challenges, and you probably feel this. And so we would really recommend focusing on stabilizing your operations and your finances before you focus on growth. If you scored between 31 and 45 points, we would say you have the basics in place, but really need to strengthen your foundation for sustained growth. And then if you scored between 61 to 75 points, you're probably performing at a high level with systems that support continued success, and we would encourage you to continue to invest in them. And so we would love to hear from a few folks. Based on the assessment, what would you say are the 3 priority areas that you plan to work on? You're welcome to come off mute or put that in the chat. All right. Katie mentioned establishing future budgets and projections and strategizing around that. Really important. Thank you, Katie. Anyone else? All right.
I just want
So,
to note for anyone who might um, be in the first group of unsustainable businesses, um, the Carla made the point of saying, you're going to want to get a hold of a handle on operations, and work on strengthening your current cash financial situation before scaling up revenue. And we'll talk about this a little bit more next week in a more financially oriented session, a session that's detailed on the topic. But the logic there is that if an operation is inefficient and is losing money, I guess the simplified way to think about it is that if you're losing, you know, a dollar every time you sell a specific item, then selling more just loses money faster. And we see it as a very common idea um, that revenue feels like a cure-all, and it can make a big difference, but the order of operations is key. That you need to figure out, how do I make this individual item a winner for me, and then scale up sales, not the other way around. It can be a quick way to get yourself in more trouble if you scale up sales before controlling expenses. It's a tough. I think we just feel like a lot of people have like the sort of like knee-jerk reaction to be like, I got to increase sales, and it's not always the first thing you need to do. And for in some cases, it doesn't even need to be a priority like this year. It can be something, controlling expenses can be something that you do for a very long period of time before ever considering trying to bolster revenue.
Thank you, Dylan. That's really helpful. And so these 15 questions, while they're a great start and kind of give you an idea of where your business might be currently, we really want to encourage you to take a deeper look at your P&L. And so that's where this recording will be really valuable, because then you can go back and revisit these instructions to analyze your own P&L. So we're going to talk about those steps now. So first of all, what is a P&L? You've probably heard me throw this word around a few times already. So that stands for profit and loss statement, and it is a financial report that shows a business's revenue, so all the money you bring in, your expenses, and profits. And it helps you understand a business's performance in a given period of time. And like I mentioned earlier, it tells the story of your business's performance in numbers. And a P&L looks a little something like this. And hopefully you're all familiar with this report. You've at least seen it at least once, even if it's not something that you consult regularly. And it's really important to note that your P&L is not the same thing as your tax return. Your accountant might categorize things a little bit differently. And so tax returns focus on taxable income and compliance, whereas your P&L provides detailed operational information. If you don't have a bookkeeper and don't have access to a P&L, we're going to talk about how you can create a simple 5-line P&L for yourself. So this is the most zoomed out version of a P&L. And you can look at a more detailed one as well, but even if this is all you've got, it's certainly a great start. And so we'll talk about each of the 5 lines in more detail. And those are your total revenue, your cost of goods sold, direct labor, overheads, and net operating profit. And before we dive into that, I want to talk about industry benchmarks. So as an industry, we have standards for what percentage of revenue a business should spend in each category. But please keep in mind that these are guidelines and it'll vary from different types of food businesses. And that these numbers apply to independent restaurants, and it would look very different for, say, a franchise model or a very large national chain. So in a healthy business, we like to see COGS, so your ingredients and your direct labor combined, that it should not exceed 60% of revenue. And these two numbers together are known as your primes. And we'll go over that a little bit more in future slides. And so from this pie chart, you can see that your COGS and your direct labor, the breakdown between the two matters a lot less than the fact that they add up to 60%. And that leaves us 30% for overheads and 10% for profit. Again, this is just sort of like the ideal industry standard. The reality is that most businesses nationally, before the pandemic and now, were closer to 3 to 5% NOP, or net operating profit. And we know that all that profit doesn't go into the owner's pocket. It's reinvested into the business. It's used to pay taxes. And so this is just a general picture. And so how might you calculate that 5-line P&L that I showed you so you can see how your business compares to those benchmarks? So the first thing you'll need is your total revenue number. It's really nice to look at it either on a monthly or an annual basis. So since we just finished taxes for 2024, we can use all of the data that we probably gathered to give our accountants to calculate a 5-line P&L. So first is your revenue. So that will be your total food and beverages sold through all channels. So if you did dine-in, takeout, third-party services like Grubhub or DoorDash, all of that will be counted in your total revenue. Things that you will not count, which might be counted by your accountant, but you're not for this exercise, is any grant funding you may have received or gift cards. Why? Grant funding is technically not money that the business earned through the course of operations. It's still very real dollars that are in your bank account, but it doesn't tell you how the business performed. And the reason we don't include gift card sales is because you still have not rendered the services or goods for that money. And so that counts later on when people actually redeem their gift cards. And so that'll be item number one that's highlighted in yellow, your top line revenue. And here we have the example of Dylan's Diner, no relation to our Dylan. And you'll also see the next line, COGS, cost of goods sold. And so these are all of the expenses that are associated with the ingredients and packaging that went into food and beverage sold. And by packaging, we mean anything, if you had takeout containers or utensils that you provided to folks, or even the takeout bag, those costs are counted with your COGS. So you'll add all of those up for the year. And then next for line number 3 is direct labor. So these are all of the labor expenses related to the people that worked hands-on in food prep and serving your customers. This does not include any administrative roles. So if you have like your bookkeeper, for example, or somebody that's doing marketing for you, that would not count in direct labor. And what is included is not only those salaries and wages, but also any payroll taxes, workers' comp, or benefits that you're offering folks. All of that gets factored into that direct labor number. And next are your overhead expenses. Overheads are kind of easy in a way because they're literally everything else that wasn't in your cost of goods sold category or your direct labor category. So that'll include occupancy costs like your rent, utilities, plus any marketing, permits, administrative salaries, software, credit card fees, even toilet paper. Your Spotify subscription in the restaurant, everything gets factored into those overhead expenses. And then the last line of our 5-line P&L is net profit. So profit or net operating profit, NOP in this case, is the money that's left in the business after all of your expenses have been paid. And this can either be a positive or a negative number. And the way we get that number is we take our line 1 total revenue, and then from that subtract lines 2, 3, and 4. And then your remainder is going to be your NOP. And so you'll see here in the little mock 5-line P&L for Dylan's Diner, we did the percentages so you can see how the business performed next to the benchmarks. And he had a really great year. He had 8% profit. Good job, Dylan. And so to summarize those benchmarks, this is what we're looking for. That your P&L, that your primes, excuse me, your COGS and your direct labor together should not exceed 60% of revenue. And so that means your COGS can range anywhere from 20 to 40% of revenue, and your direct labor can also range from 20 to 40% of revenue. What we care about is really the sum of those two numbers. And next, your overheads should ideally be 30% or lower of your revenue. And so your rent is also a good indicator. We expect rent to also not exceed 8% of your total revenue. And lastly, NOP of 10% net operating profit is considered healthy, but that might not be realistic for some businesses, and that's okay. Like I said, nationally, we're looking at a 3 to 5% NOP range. And so based on your mini assessment and then your P&L assessment, which you'll do on your own, let's do a little bit of action planning and start thinking about how we might use this new information to help us make future decisions. And so, like I mentioned, we really want to focus on progress, not perfection. Perfection is not even attainable, so that's not where your energy should be. And you have to start where you are. Instead of getting overwhelmed with things that aren't going right, it's easiest to just identify the 3 areas that you want to focus on, maybe for the next quarter or even this year, and work on those. And then develop specific improvement strategies for each. And this is the really important part. Setting measurable goals with timelines. Goals that don't get measured don't get achieved. And then review your progress against these goals at least monthly. And so in general, these are 4 areas that we would recommend everybody revisit, and it should capture most of the items that we've discussed. And so step 1, focusing on your financial fundamentals. If you don't already have a professional bookkeeper, getting one. As well, and if you do have a bookkeeper, making sure that you're meeting on a monthly basis to review your P&L. 2, Continuing to build your cash reserves. We know that this can be really difficult with how volatile the economy is right now, but it's a good goal to have to at least aim for 3 months of savings. And three, focusing on paying down any high interest debt that you have so that you can reach a target of less than 20% debt to income ratio. Step 2, focusing on systematizing operations, making sure that you're implementing menu costing for every single item on that menu, which might feel like a really big task. So even focusing on your top 5 best sellers is a great place to start. Developing labor management systems, so improving your scheduling and cross-training, taking a look at that sales data and seeing how that squares up with your daily or hourly or weekly sales is an easy place to get started. And tying it back to those financial fundamentals, making sure that you're reviewing P&Ls so that you know that the adjustments that you're making are actually working. And step 3, building management capacity. So making sure that you're prioritizing time to work on the business. Even an hour a month is a place to start, although we'd love for that to be at least an hour a week, so that you can think about the long-term growth of your business and making sure that you're implementing data-driven management. So again, looking at those POS reports, seeing what's selling, when, all of that data is available to you. And then doing financial monthly reviews really becomes critical to building your management capacity and to growing your business. The more advanced the business gets, the more non-negotiable reviewing those financials becomes. And step 4, optimizing revenue generation. So thinking about how you might develop more than one revenue stream if you're only relying on one. Investing a little bit in marketing, so about 3% of your revenue is a good place to start, and strengthening your online presence through routine engagement, whether that means posting or making sure that your website is up to date. Really important to make sure that that digital presence shows off all the great things about your business. And so some 30-day quick wins, things that you can do today, this week, to improve things is making sure that your Google business profile is up to date. Are your business hours correct? Is your website link working? Just Google your business and see what comes up, and you should be able to make those changes. Cost your top 10 menu items or even your top 5 menu items this month. Schedule monthly P&L reviews with your bookkeeper if you have one. Analyze your hourly sales reports. If you use things like Toast or Square, it's a simple report that already exists. You don't even have to do anything to view that data. And then define 3 monthly goals for May. And so to wrap up, I hope that you've seen now that there are some clear patterns that thriving food businesses share, and that progress really does happen through continuing to work at it and focusing your effort on consistent improvement. And so start where you are and set measurable short-term and long-term goals for yourself, and track your progress. And so our next session is going to be next Tuesday, same time. We'll be focusing on the finances with Dylan. And I'd love to ask the group, what was the most memorable thing you learned today? And what are some of the first things you think you'll implement or look into more deeply as you go back to your business? And if there are any final questions, now would be a great time for them. All right, well, folks, think about those. In the meantime, I'll turn it over to Jared.
Thanks, Carla. I personally learned a lot as somebody who's not working in the food business industry, but I did learn a lot, and so I appreciate your time. I just want to talk briefly about the opportunity for one-on-one food business coaching with PrepShift. So eligible small businesses can receive up to 4 hours of one-on-one coaching. This is for Cambridge businesses, and there are 3 ways to be eligible. You don't need to worry about this too much. You'll fill out the form, and then I'll review and we'll start the communication there. But the business that you own can be in an NRS district, neighborhood revitalization strategy area. district, or you yourself live within one of Cambridge's NRS districts. If neither of those apply, then we would move towards what we call a micro enterprise or micro business. So businesses that meet income eligibility and have fewer than 5 full-time employees would be eligible. If you have questions, if you are interested in one-on-one coaching, again, this is free to you. Feel free to email me. My email is right there on the screen, jstaley@cambridgema.gov, or feel free to give me a call, although I will say email's probably best. And then you are welcome to apply using that URL at the bottom of your screen there. Thank you so much, and I'll turn it back over to the PrepChef team.
Thank you, Jared. So thank you all so much for joining us today. We welcome your feedback. So please, if you want to have your phone out, scan the QR code. It's literally a 2-minute survey, I promise. And then I'll stick around for a little while longer to answer any questions that folks have. If you have any specific concerns, we'd be happy to hear from you. And if you don't have any further questions, thank you so much again for your participation, and we hope to see you next week.
Pause for a moment. All right. Thanks all. You have a wonderful day. I'll see you next week.
Thank you.